Today we are going to talk about probability, and the concept of probability is central to the science of statistics. This is one of the fundamental concepts and central concepts on which statistics, and in particular the inferential statistics, is based. So this is a basic and central topic to cover in statistics, especially in inferential statistics. Now, what is meant by probability? What is the meaning of probability? The word probability is related to the words like probably, likely, or chance of something. That when we are talking about chance of something to occur, when we talk about likelihood of something to occur, that this is something which is likely to occur, this is something which has a chance to occur. And when we say that this is going to probably happen or this is probably not going to happen, so we are basically talking about the probability of that something, probability of that outcome to occur. So this is the meaning of probability that we use in our daily life whenever we are talking about likelihood of something or the chance of something. For example, when we see dark clouds on the sky, so what we are going to say is it is probably going to rain, right? So we are talking about the probability of rain, that it is probably going to rain. Or we say it is likely going to rain. So it means that we are again talking about probability that it is likely to rain. Or we can say that there is a good chance of rain. So this is the thing that we use in our daily life as well. When we talk about chance of something, when we talk about the likelihood of something, and when we talk about probability of something. So this is basically probability. And this is the concept of probability that we have in our daily life. So what is the meaning of probability? Mathematical theory of probability arose from the study of games of chance. And you know what are the games of chance? So the mathematical theory of probability arose from these games of chance. So probability is basically quantifying the chance with which the stated or nominated outcome of an event will take place. So this is the meaning of probability in statistics or in mathematics, right? That what is probability? Probability is quantifying the chance with which the stated or nominated outcome of an event will take place. So what is the meaning of probability in literal meaning? In literal meaning, probability means chances or likelihood of anything. So in statistics, it is basically the measure of likelihood of an event. So probability is quantifying the chance that you are giving the chance in numbers, right? So you are giving the chance in a number on a scale by which the stated or nominated outcome of an event will take place. And when we say quantifying the chance, it means that we are going to give a number of the probability, and by convention the probability values, they lie on a scale between 0 and 1, and 0 refers to impossibility and 1 refers to certainty. So the value of probability, that when we quantify the chances of an outcome, right, so that quantification, that value lies between 0 and 1. And when the value is exactly 0, it means that that event is impossible to occur. That outcome is impossible to occur. And when we have the value of 1 exactly, it means that that outcome is definitely going to, that outcome is certainly going to occur, right? And in terms of percentages, we can say that there is 0% chance of something and 1 refers to 100% chance of something. So the probability value usually lies between these two values. The closer it is to 0, the less chances, the less likelihood it has. The closer it is to 1, it has more chances, more likelihood to occur. So this is the meaning of probability in statistics, that probability simply means taking the chances or the chances of something, right? So in mathematics and statistics, probability means to quantify those chances, right? And this is the measure of likelihood of an event, and the value lies between 0 and 1. Now, when we say that probability is basically quantifying the chance of something to occur, and we have to calculate the value of probability. So how we are going to do that, how we are going to calculate the probability value. So this is a simple formula. It is a number of nominated outcomes divided by the total number of possible outcomes. So this is the simplest formula of calculating probability, that we are actually quantifying the chance of something to occur. So we have to take all of the outcomes, the number of all of the possible outcomes, and then we are going to divide the number of nominated outcomes by that total number of possible outcomes. And that is going to give us the probability of that nominated outcome. So nominated outcome is that something which we have nominated and for which we want to calculate the probability. And the possible outcomes is all the other outcomes, right? The total of all the possible outcomes of that event. And we are going to take the simplest example for this. So coin tossing is the best example to describe the basics of probability calculation. So we have an event which is coin tossing, that we are going to toss the coin, right? Like we do before our cricket match starts. Outcomes are head and tail, right? So the outcomes could be head or a tail, because it has two sides, the head side and the tail side. And for example, if we have chosen head, so our nominated outcome in this case is head. And how many times head is present in a single coin? So in a single coin, there is only one head which is present. So what is the total number of the nominated outcomes in this case? The total number of the nominated outcomes is 1. So our nominated outcome is head. And how many times this head is present? This head is present only once. So the number of nominated outcomes is 1. And what is the total number of possible outcomes? Because we have 2 possible outcomes, so therefore this number is going to be 2. So head is present only once and tail is present only once as well. So we have 1 plus 1, which is equal to 2, right? So now we have 2 possible outcomes and our nominated outcome is 1. So what we are going to do is we are going to divide the nominated outcome number by the total number of possible outcomes. So we are going to divide 1 by 2 and it is going to result in the value of 0.5. So this is the value of probability that we have calculated, and this is 0.5. And you can see that it is exactly in the middle of the scale. So it is in the middle of 0 and 1, and this is 0.5. And how much percent it is? It is 50%, right? So what we are going to say is that probability of head in a single event of coin tossing is 0.5, right? So the probability of head in a single event of coin tossing is 0.5. So this is how we have calculated the probability of head to occur when we have an event of coin tossing. So when we have an event of coin tossing and our nominated outcome is tail in this case, right? So we are taking tail as our nominated outcome. And how many times tail is present? Tail is present only once. So the nominated outcome is 1. And what is the total number of possible outcomes? It is 2, head and tail. So we are going to calculate the probability by dividing the number of the nominated outcome by the total number of possible outcomes. So we are going to get 0.5 value. So again, we are going to say that probability of tail in a single event of coin tossing is 0.5, right? So this is the meaning of probability, that we have to count the number of nominated outcomes, right? And then we have to divide that number by the total number of possible outcomes. And by dividing this, we are going to have the value of probability, and this value should lie on a scale between 0 and 1, right? And now we are going to take another example, which is the dice, and how many faces there are on the dice, how many sides it has. So it has 1 to 6 numbers on 6 sides. So this is basically a dice. So our event that we are talking about is dice rolling. And the outcomes are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, because it has 2 sides, 6 sides. And nominated outcome is, for example, 6, that we want to calculate the probability of 6 in a single event of dice rolling, right? So what we are going to calculate is we are going to calculate the possibility or probability of 6 to occur in a single event of dice rolling. So our event is dice rolling and our nominated outcome is 6. Now we have to find out that what is the number of 6, that how many times 6 is present. So 6 is present only once on the dice, so therefore the number of 6 is only 1. And what is the total number of possible outcomes? All of these numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they are present only once. So each one has a 1 number. So this is going to sum up as 6. So the total number of possible outcomes is 6. And now calculate the probability. So probability is going to be 1 by 6. So 1 is the number of our nominated outcome and 6 is the total number of possible outcomes. So this is going to be 1 by 6 and it is equal to 0.1667, or in terms of percentage, it is 16.67%. So we are going to say that probability of 6 in a single event of dice rolling is 0.1667. And again, you can see that this value lies on the scale between 0 and 1, right? And for example, if our nominated outcome is 3 this time, that we want to calculate the probability of 3. So how many times 3 is present? 3 is present only once. So the number of possible and number of nominated outcome is 1. And what is the total number of possible outcomes? It is 6. So we are going to calculate the probability of 3 to occur in a single event of dice rolling. And this is going to be 1 by 6. And this is 0.1667 or 16.67%. So probability of 3 in a single event of dice rolling is 0.1667. So this is how we calculate probabilities. Now these examples of coin and dice, so these are the examples which are related somehow, and these are the simplest example because these are the examples in which all the possible outcomes, they had equal chances or likelihoods to occur. Like when we talked about the coin, right? So the coin has two sides, head and tail, and head is present only once and the tail is present only once. So each one of these two has got an equal chance to occur. And similarly, in case of dice, we have 6 sides and each side is represented by a different number from 1 to 6. And because each number is present only once, so each number has an equal chance to occur out of the total chances, which are 6. So these are the examples in which all the outcomes, right, all the possible outcomes, they had equal chances of occurring because they were equally present within the event. So these are the simplest examples of probability. And now we are going to see the more complicated example in which all the outcomes, they don't have an equal chance to occur. So here we are going to take another example in which all the possible outcomes, they don't have equal chances of occurring. Like in the previous examples, all the possible outcomes, they had equal chance of occurring. But now we are going to take an example in which all the possible outcomes, they don't have equal chances of occurrence. So we are going to take the example of a jar in which there is a collection of jelly beans, right? So there are jelly beans of different colors in this jar, and 10 of these jelly beans are red in color, 9 are yellow in color, 3 are blue in color, and 14 are pink in color. So each of these different colors of the jelly beans, they are present in different numbers within this collection of jelly beans. So if there is an event of picking up one jelly bean from the jar, right? So if you are randomly going to pick one jelly bean from the jar, and we are interested in finding out the color, for example, the red color or yellow color, blue color or pink color. right? So when we're going to pick up one jelly bean from the jar, the outcome could be the color. Either it could be red, it could be yellow, it could be blue, or it could be pink, right? So it could be of any color. And we want to calculate their probabilities. For example, we want to calculate the probability of the red jelly beans, that if we are picking up one jelly bean randomly from the jar, so what is the probability that that jelly bean is going to be of red color, right? So for that purpose, we have to apply the formula of probability. And for that purpose, we need to have the total number of the nominated outcomes and the total number of possible outcomes. So how many times red is present? Red is present 10 times in this collection, right? So the nominated outcome, the number of this nominated outcome is 10. And then the total number of possible outcomes. So when we take their sum, that how many jelly beans are there? There are 10 red plus 9 yellow plus 3 blue plus 14 pink. So we have total 36 possible outcomes, right? So what is the number of the nominated outcome? It is how many times that nominated outcome is present. It is present 10 times. And what are the total number of possible outcomes? It is 36, right? So probability is going to be 10 divided by 36. And this is equal to 0.2778 or 27.78%. So we can say that probability of picking up a red jelly bean in a single event is 0.2778. So this is our answer, that this is the probability of picking up a red jelly bean. Now you might have a question that if there are 4 beans, so why don't we calculate the probability by taking 1 by 4 for each of the beans, right? So this is quite a genuine question, that if there are 4 colors of the jelly beans in the jar and we're going to randomly pick up one jelly bean from there, so we should calculate the probability by taking 1 by 4 for that specific, for that nominated color of the jelly bean, because there are 4. But why we are not taking 1 out of 4 is because these jelly beans, they are present in different numbers, right? So you can see that the pink jelly beans, it is present in the highest numbers. So if it is present in the highest numbers, it has more probability of being picked up, right? And the blue jelly bean, it has it is present only 3 times, so its chances are not equal to that of pink because it is less in number. It is represented less in it. For example, when you talk about your class, so your class is dominated by the number of girls, so there are more girls than boys in your class. So if you are going to randomly nominate one of your class fellows to talk about probability, so what is the chance that this is going to be a girl, or what is the chance this is going to be a boy? So obviously the chances for a girl would be higher because the girls are present in higher numbers. So same is the case here, that although there are 4 colors, but these 4 colors, they're not equally present, rather they are present in different numbers. So each has a different probability of being picked up, right? So the probability for red to be picked up is 0.2778, right? We calculate the probability for yellow. So if our nominated outcome is yellow, so how many times yellow is present? It is present 9 out of 36, right? So yellow is 9 out of 36, so its probability is going to be 0.25, right? Or 25%. So probability of picking up a yellow jelly bean in a single event is 0.25. And now we calculate for the blue. So how many times blue is present? It is present 3 times, right? Out of 36. So out of 36 jelly beans, 3 are blue. So what is the probability that if we pick up a random jelly bean from the jar, we're going to pick up a blue? The probability is 3 by 36, which is 0.0833 or 8.33%. So probability of picking up a blue jelly bean in a single event is 0.0833, which is close to 0, right? And if you want to calculate the probability for pink, so how many times pink is present? It is present 14 times out of 36. So this is going to be 0.3889 or 38.89%. So probability of picking up a pink jelly bean in a single event is 0.3889, right? So this is the example in which all the possible outcomes, they don't have equal chances of occurring. Rather, each has a different chance, each has a different probability, and this probability is based on their occurrence. It is based on their frequency in the total number of possible outcomes, right? So this is one example. Now we are going to take another example, and this time we are going to take example from the field biology, and we are talking about a pond which is inhabited by only two species of meniscus midge. So these are small flies, and we are talking about two of these species, Dixella automalis and Dixella attica. And this is the life cycle for these flies. This is the general life cycle of meniscus midge. And you can see that A in this figure refers to the fly, and its larval and pupal stages, they are in the water, right? So therefore we are talking about the pond, that the pond is inhabited by two species of meniscus midge, Dixella automalis and Dixella attica. And at what stage of their life they are going to be aquatic? They are aquatic during their larval and pupal stage, because when they become adults, they are flies and they are going to be outside of the water. Now, the pupae of these two species, Dixella automalis and Dixella attica, they are morphologically similar, right? So when we look at their pupa, they are morphologically similar, and they are randomly and independently dispersed in pond. So if you look at a random pupa collected from the pond, you are unable to describe the species of this pupa, that which species this belongs to, because their pupae, they are morphologically similar. So you cannot differentiate, or you cannot identify the species unless the fly emerges out of that pupa, right? So you are going to only identify its species when the fly emerges out of the pupa, because their pupae are morphologically similar, right? So this is the example, and I'm going to repeat it, that we are talking about an insect species, a flying insect species of meniscus midge, and this insect has got its larval and pupal stage in the water, and its adult stage is flying, right? So we are talking about a pond, and this pond is inhabited by two species of the meniscus midge, Dixella automalis and Dixella attica. And these two species, they are closely related to each other, as you can see that they belong to the same genus, and their pupae are morphologically similar, and they are randomly and independently dispersed in pond, right? So unless and until you can see the fly emerging out of the pupa, you cannot identify which species this pupa belongs to, because the pupae, they are morphologically similar, so you cannot distinguish the species at that stage unless the fly emerges out of the pupa, right? So this is the example that we are going to take. So now that we have discussed that their pupae are morphologically similar of these two species of the meniscus midge, so if we have randomly collected a pupa from the pond, then what this pupa is going to be? It is going to emerge as Dixella automalis, or is it going to emerge as Dixella attica? So if we don't have any previous information, then we will suppose that both have equal chances, right? So this pupa could emerge as Dixella automalis, or this could emerge as Dixella attica, because we don't have any previous information, so we are supposing that their probability is going to be 0.5 and 0.5. So they're going to have equal chances. But if we have a previous information, then we are going to calculate the probability according to that previous information that we have. So the long-term studies revealed that out of every 100 pupae collected from that pond, 80 will emerge as Dixella automalis and 20 will emerge as Dixella attica. So now we have a previous information about their relative distribution, that if we have 100 pupae, then 80 are going to emerge as Dixella automalis and 20 are going to emerge as Dixella attica. So in this case, we are not going to count their equal chances or equal probabilities. Rather, we are going to calculate their relative specific probabilities. And also about their sex, that the male to female ratio is 1:1, right? So we have information about this thing as well, that the male to female ratio is 1:1. So out of every 2 pupae collected, 1 will emerge as male and 1 is likely to emerge as female, right? So this is the information that we have, that if we have 100 pupae, then 80 are expected to emerge as Dixella automalis and 20 are expected to emerge as Dixella attica. And if we want to know about the sex, irrespective of their species, then out of every 2 pupae, 1 is going to emerge as male and 1 is going to emerge as female, right? So when we have a pupa randomly collected, it could be either Dixella automalis or Dixella attica, or it could be male or female. And now we want to calculate their probabilities, right? Their probability values. So we are talking about an event, and the event is hatching of 1 pupa collected from the pond, right? So we have collected 1 pupa from the pond, and the event is hatching of 1 pupa collected from the pond. The outcomes are Dixella automalis and Dixella attica. So these are the 2 possible outcomes, that it could be either Dixella automalis or it could be either Dixella attica. Nominated outcome, for example, is Dixella automalis, that we want to calculate the probability that what is the probability this pupa is going to emerge as Dixella automalis. And we know from the previous information that if we have 100 pupae, then 80 of them are expected to emerge as Dixella automalis. So the nominated outcome is 80, and the total number of possible outcomes are 100. So probability is going to be 80 by 100, which is 0.8. So probability of a pupa to emerge as Dixella automalis is 0.8. And likewise, if we nominate Dixella attica, so how many times it is present out of 100? It is present 20 times. And what is the total number of possible outcomes? It is 100. So this is going to be 20 by 100, which is 0.2. So probability of a pupa to emerge as Dixella attica is 0.2. So this is the probability for Dixella attica. If we want to calculate the probability for the sex, for the male and female probabilities, so the nominated outcome, for example, if it is male, then it is going to be 1, right? And what is the total number of possible outcomes? It is 2. So this is going to be 1 divided by 2, which is 0.5. So probability of a pupa to emerge as male is 0.5. And the probability for the pupa to emerge as female is also going to be 0.5, right? So this is how we calculate their probability in numbers. We give their probability values based on the previous information. But if we don't have a previous information, then we are going to give them equal chances of occurrence. And now we are going to discuss another concept in probability, and that concept is that sum of individual probabilities of all possible outcomes equals 1, right? So this is very important in discussing the probabilities. And we are going to take the example of coin. So we had 2 outcomes. The probability of head was 0.5 and the probability of tail was 0.5 as well. So when we take their sum, it is equal to 1. So probability of head plus probability of tail is 0.5 plus 0.5, and this is equal to 1. Similarly, when we take the example of dice, in this case, the probability of 1 to appear is 0.1667. Probability of 2 to appear in a single event of dice rolling is also 0.1667. For 3, it is also 0.1667. For 4, it is also 0.1667. For 5 as well, it is 0.1667. And for 6 as well, it is 0.1667. So these are the individual probabilities of all possible outcomes. And their sum should be equal to 1. So when we take their total probability, this is equal to 1. So this is an important concept. And then when we talk about the jelly beans, we took the example of jelly beans as well. So we had calculated the probabilities for all the colors. So probability of red is 0.2778, probability for yellow is 0.25, probability for blue is 0.0833, and probability of pink is 0.3889, and their sum is equal to 1. So total probability is equal to 1 of all these possible outcomes. And similarly, when we talk about the Dixella example that we took, so the pupa species, the probability of Dixella automalis is 0.8, and probability of Dixella attica is 0.2, and the sum of their probabilities is also equal to 1. And similarly, when we talk about the sex of the pupa, then probability of male is 0.5 and probability of female is 0.5. So their total probability is 1, right? So the sum of the individual probabilities of all possible outcomes, it should be equal to 1. So this is another concept, and which is very important, that when you have calculated probabilities of all the individual outcomes, and when you take their sum, then the sum of their probabilities should be equal to 1. And if their sum is not equal to 1, it means that you have done something wrong in the calculations, right? So you take the individual probabilities, you calculate the individual probabilities of all possible outcomes, and then you take the sum of those individual probabilities, and that sum should be equal to 1, right? So this is an important concept in probability. And now there is another important concept related to probability, and that is probability distribution. So what is probability distribution? It is basically the breakdown which shows the individual probabilities of all possible outcomes and which adds up to 1. So when you show up, or when you represent the individual probabilities of all the possible outcomes into a single table, into a single distribution table, then that is known as the probability distribution. For example, here we have the table which represents the probability distribution of picking up of different jelly beans, and we have the individual probabilities of the 4 possible outcomes, which is red jelly beans, yellow jelly beans, blue jelly beans, and pink jelly beans. And we have written their individual probabilities. And when we take the sum of these individual probabilities, this is known as 1. So this breakdown, which shows the individual probabilities of all the possible outcomes, is known as the probability distribution, right? So today we have discussed the concept of probability, that what is meant by probability in statistics. It is basically just quantifying the chances of anything to occur, of a nominated outcome to occur from an event, right? And then we discussed that the probabilities, the sum of the individual probabilities, that should be equal to 1. And when we give the breakdown of all the individual probabilities of all the possible outcomes, so that distribution is known as the probability distribution, right? Today we are going to continue our discussion on the concept of probability in statistics, and now we are going to discuss another important concept in probability, which is known as the compound probabilities. So compound probability is basically the probability in which we are going to add up or multiply the probabilities of individual outcomes. So probabilities, they may be added or multiplied, and that is known as a compound probability or a joint probability, right? And let's see how we do it. And we are going to take the example of jelly beans of different colors, and this is the same example that we took in the previous lecture. So what is the probability of probability that a jelly bean will be either red or blue? So what is the event here? The event here is picking up a jelly bean randomly from this collection of jelly beans, right? And we want to calculate the probability that the jelly bean that we have picked up from this collection, it is either red or blue. So in the previous lecture, we discussed their individual probabilities, that what is the probability of that jelly bean to be red, to be blue, to be yellow, or to be pink, right? But here we have a different sort of a question. So here we are talking about the probability of jelly bean to be either red or blue, right? So we are not talking about their individual probabilities, rather we are talking about their collective probability, their compound probability, right? So for that purpose, what we need to know is the individual probability of red and individual probability of blue. And that we had already calculated in the previous lecture. And what is the probability of red in this specific example? It is 0.2778. And what is the probability of blue? It is 0.0833, right? So these are the individual probabilities of red and blue. And now we come to our question that what is their joint probability? What is their compound probability? And for that purpose, we are going to add their individual probabilities, right? So probability of the jelly bean to be either red or blue is 0.2778 plus 0.0833, which is equal to 0.3611, right? So here we have the compound probability, and we can say that the probability for a randomly picked up jelly bean to be either red or blue is 0.3611. So this is their compound probability. And now we take the example of the pupa that we discussed in the previous lecture, and we are going to calculate their compound probabilities. And in this case, we are going to calculate the compound probabilities of their species and sex. So as you remember from the previous lecture that we had calculated their individual probabilities, right? So now we are calculating their compound probabilities. So we want to calculate the probability of male Dixella automalis. And remember from the previous lecture, what is the individual probability of male? It is 0.5. And what is the individual probability of Dixella automalis species? This is 0.8, right? So in this case, we are going to multiply their individual probabilities. That if we want to calculate the probability of the pupa to be male Dixella automalis, so in this case, we are going to multiply their probabilities. And this is going to be 0.5 and multiplied by 0.8, and this is going to be equal to 0.4, right? And if we want to calculate the probability of female Dixella automalis, again, we are going to take the individual probability of the female and individual probability of Dixella automalis, which is 0.5 and 0.8. And we are going to take their to multiply these individual probabilities, and this is going to be 0.4. So 0.4 is the probability of a randomly collected pupa to emerge as female Dixella automalis is 0.4, right? And what is the probability for male Dixella attica? And for that purpose, we need to have the probability of male and probability of Dixella attica, which is 0.5 for male and 0.2 for Dixella attica, and this is equal to 1. And if we multiply these individual probabilities, this is equal to 1. So this is their compound probability. And if we want to calculate the probability of female Dixella attica, so this is going to be 0.5, which is the probability for female, multiplied by 0.2, which is the probability for species Dixella attica. And this is going to be equal to 0.1. So 0.1 is the probability that the pupa that we have randomly collected from the pond, it is going to emerge as female Dixella attica. And when we take their total probability, this is equal to 1, right? So the probability of male Dixella automalis, which is 0.4, plus probability of female Dixella automalis, which is 0.4, the probability of male Dixella attica, which is 0.1, and probability of female Dixella attica, which is also 1. So when we take their sum, the sum is equal to 1, right? So in case of compound probabilities as well, that when we have the compound probabilities, all the possible compound probabilities, and when we take their sum, so that should be equal to 1. And here is their probability distribution. So we have the probability distribution of species and sex of pupae then when we are taking these two traits together, right? So we are talking about the compound probabilities, and we can see that this is their probability distribution table. And now we take the example of dice, that how we can understand this concept of compound probabilities by taking this example. So suppose we want to find out the probability of dice roll to be even, right? So how many even numbers are there in the dice? So numbers are from 1 to 6. So how many are the even numbers? The even numbers are 3. So this is going to be 3 out of 6, which is 0.5. Or in other words, we can say that this is the compound probability of 2, 4, and 6, which are the even numbers present in the present on the dice, right? So how many even numbers do we have? We have 3. And what are these 3 even numbers? These are 2, 4, and 6. So we are going to sum their individual probabilities, which are 0.1667, 0.1667 plus 0.1667, and this is equal to 0.5, right? So here we have calculated their compound or joint probability, which is 3 by 6 and which is equal to 0.5, right? Now we want to calculate the probability of dice to be 4 or less, right? That what is the probability when we have an event of dice rolling, and we want to find out that what is the probability that the outcome of this dice rolling could be a number of 4 or less, right? So in this case, how many numbers are 4 or less? So this is 4 itself, and then 3, 2, and 1. So here we have 4 numbers which are either 4 or less than 4. So this is going to be their joint probability, a compound probability of 4, 3, 2, and 1. And we are going to take their sum, and this is equal to 0.67. So we can say that in a single event of dice rolling, the probability of dice to be 4 or less is 0.67, right? Now we'll take another example, and this is the example in which we're talking about 2 consecutive dice rolls. So in the previous 2 examples, we were talking about a single dice roll, but here we are talking about 2 consecutive dice rolls, and we want to calculate the probability of 6 in 2 consecutive dice rolls. So for that purpose, what we are going to do is we need to know the individual probability of 6 in a single event of dice rolling, and the probability of 6 in the second event of dice rolling. So we have probability of 6 in the first event of dice roll, and we are going to multiply that with the probability of 6 in the second event of dice roll. So this is going to be 0.1667 multiplied by 0.1667, and this is equal to 0.0278. So 0.0278 is the probability of 6, right, in the 2 consecutive events of dice rolling. So here we have the example of dice. And now we are coming back to our example of the jelly beans that we have in a jar: 10 red jelly beans, 9 yellow jelly beans, 3 blue jelly beans, and 14 pink jelly beans. And these are their individual probabilities within that jar. And what is the probability of picking up either blue or pink? And for that purpose, as we discussed in the previous slide, that we need to add their probabilities. So this is going to be probability of blue plus probability of pink, and this is going to be 0.0833 plus 0.3889, which is equal to 0.4722, right? So this is their compound probability. The compound probability of the jelly bean to be either pink or blue, right? And we have a slightly different scenario here, and in this case we are talking about the probability of first 2 beans picked up to be red, right? In this case we are going to multiply their individual probabilities. So probability of first bean to be red multiplied by probability of second bean to be red, and in this case this is going to be 0.2778 multiplied by 0.2778, and this is equal to 0.0772. So the probability of 2 consecutive jelly beans to be picked up as red is 0.0722. So probability of picking up 1 jelly bean to be red is 0.2778. But when we take the compound probability of 2 consecutive events of picking up a red jelly bean, so that is going to be less, and this is going to be 0.0772, right? So this is the concept of compound probability. Now you would be rightly confused that at some places we are adding up the probabilities, and at some places we are multiplying the probabilities, right? So now I'm going to tell you a quick tip that how you should identify that which probabilities are to be added up and which are the scenarios in which probabilities have to be multiplied, right? And here is that quick tip. And for this purpose, you need to understand this flow chart. And if we are talking about two or more consecutive events, we are going to multiply their probabilities, right? For example, the probability of first two beans picked up to be red are two events that we are talking about. We are talking about first event of picking up a red jelly bean, and then we are talking about the second event of picking up a second jelly bean. So here we are talking about two consecutive events. And in that case, for one event is going to be picking up first bean, and the second event is going to be picking up second bean. So these are two consecutive events. And when we have two or more consecutive events and we want to find out their compound probability, so in that case, we are going to multiply their probabilities. So this is a quick tip to remember that when you have two or more consecutive events, you are going to multiply the individual probabilities. And if you have one event, then it could be two possibilities, right? And the first possibility is that the nature of outcome is 1. So if the nature of outcome is 1, you are going to add those individual probabilities. Like in the same example of the jelly beans, that what is the probability of picking up either blue or pink in a single event of picking up a single bean? The nature of outcome is 1, which is color of the jelly beans. So in this case, we are not talking about two events, right? We are talking about a single event, and we are going to pick up a single jelly bean, right? But in this case, we want to know the compound probability of two colors, right? That what is the compound probability of these two outcomes? So what is the nature of these two outcomes? Are these the same type of the outcome, or are they different types of the outcome? So we can see that they are the same type of the outcome, right? That they both are the colors, right? So we have the same type, same nature of the outcome. So therefore, we are going to add their individual probabilities, right? So here we are talking about a single event, and we are talking about the nature of the outcome, that if the nature of the outcome is same, then we are going to add up their probabilities. And what is the second scenario in case of one event? Then when we are talking about one event, but the nature of outcomes is also different, right? So if the nature of outcomes is 2, we are going to multiply them. Like the probability of a single pupa to emerge as female Rixella automalis in a single event of pupa hatching, right? So in this case, what is the nature of outcome? Is this the same or different? No. We are talking about two types of the outcomes, and these outcomes are different in their nature. One outcome belongs to the probability distribution of species, and one outcome belongs to the probability distribution of sex, right? So these two are different types of the outcomes, and therefore we are going to multiply their probabilities, right? So in this case, we are going to multiply because these are two different outcomes, species and sex, right? So this is the quick tip that how you can identify that you have to add the probabilities or you have to multiply the probabilities in order to calculate the compound or joint probability, right? So I'm going to repeat this again, that if you have two or more consecutive events, then you're going to multiply, right? But if you have one event, then it depends on the type of the outcome, that if the outcome nature is same, if the outcome belongs to the same probability distribution, then you're going to add up. And if the outcome is different, the nature of outcome is different, and it belongs to two different probability distributions, then you're going to multiply them. Like in the case of pupa, that we had two types of the outcomes, and they belong to two different probability distributions, like female and the species, right? So that is why we are going to multiply them. So I hope this concept is clear now. that where we have to multiply the probabilities and where we have to add up the probabilities in order to have the compound probability. And here, for your understanding, I have drawn a comparison between simple and compound probabilities. So probability could be either simple probability or a compound probability, right? So in case of single probability, we talk about a single event. And in compound probability, we either talk about two or more consecutive events, or we talk about a single event, right? So in simple probability, where we have only one event, there is no need to multiply or add because we are talking about only a single event and a single outcome. And this is going to be a simple probability. So there is no need to multiply or add, right? But in case of compound probability, we have two options. One is there are two or more consecutive events, or we have a single event. So if we have two or more consecutive events, then we are going to multiply them straight away, right? So if you have two or more consecutive events, we are going to multiply the probabilities of the individual outcomes, individual events, right? But if we have a single event, then we can have the nature of outcome as 1 or the nature of outcome as 2, right? So here we are talking about a single event and we want to calculate the compound probability of two outcomes. But if those two outcomes, they belong to the similar probability distribution, they are of the same type, or if they are of different types, they belong to two different probability distributions, right? So if they belong to a single probability distributions that they are of same type, then we are going to add their individual probabilities. But if they belong to two different probability distributions and their nature of the outcome is different, then we are going to multiply, right? So in simple probability, we don't need any addition or multiplication because we're talking about a single event and a single outcome. But in case of compound probability, we have to decide that either we have to multiply or we have to add the individual probabilities, and that depends on the number of the events and the number of the nature of the outcomes. So here is a simple comparison of the compound and simple probabilities. Now, having talked about the simple and the compound probabilities, so here we have another example, and this example is from biology, in which we are talking about the compound probabilities. So we are talking about a trait which is biallelic. Biallelic means that it has two alleles. One of these alleles is dominant and the other allele is recessive. The dominant allele is represented by the capital letter A, and the recessive allele is represented by the small letter a. So this is a simple example from basic biology, that we have a biallelic trait with one dominant allele and one recessive allele. And we have a cross of two individuals. One of these individuals is homozygous for the dominant allele and one of the individuals is homozygous for the recessive allele. So they are going to produce a single type of the offspring. All of them are going to be heterozygous, right? So all of them are heterozygous. They all have a single copy of the dominant allele and a single copy of the recessive allele. So this is going to be their offspring. Now consider the cross of these two heterozygous individuals, right? Two heterozygous individuals, each one of them has one copy of the dominant allele and one copy of the recessive allele. So the expected genotype frequency in that case is one individual with the homozygous dominant allele, two individuals who are heterozygous, and one individual who is homozygous for the recessive allele. So this is their expected genotype frequency, which is 1:2:1. Now, what are their probabilities? So probability for the offspring to be homozygous dominant is 1/4. The probability for individual to be heterozygous is 2/4, and probability of individual to be homozygous recessive is 1/4. So the probability for the homozygous dominant is 0.25, probability for heterozygous is 0.5, and probability for homozygous recessive is 0.25. So this is basic genetics, this is basic biology that we all well know of, right? So this is well known to all of us, and this is just a recap to understand the concept of probability in this case, right? So we have calculated the genotype, the probability of the genotypes for all the individual possible genotypes. Now we take the example of the same cross that we had discussed in the previous slide. So we have the cross of two heterozygous individuals, and we have calculated the individual probabilities of all the three possible genotypes of that cross, right? Now we want to answer some simple questions. Now we want to calculate the some probabilities out of that cross. So the first question is that what is the probability that first child is homozygous dominant? We want to find out that what is the probability that first child is homozygous dominant. And the second question is, what is the probability that second child is heterozygous? The third question is, what is the probability that first two children are homozygous recessive? Then the question is, what is the probability that second and third children are heterozygous? What is the probability that first child is female heterozygous? So we have these different questions, and there is another question. What is the probability that a child is either homozygous dominant or recessive? So these are how many questions? These are the 6 questions that we need to answer. And all these 6 questions, they are talking about calculation of probability of something, probability of different events, right? Now we are going to answer these questions one by one, and we are going to take the same example, the cross of two heterozygous individuals. Now coming to our first question, which is the probability of first child to be homozygous dominant. So probability of first child to be homozygous dominant is probability of the AA genotype, which is the homozygous dominant genotype. And we know from the cross that this probability is 0.25. So we are going to answer this question as the probability of the first child to be homozygous dominant is 0.25. So now we have the second question, which is what is the probability that second child is heterozygous? So in this case, we are going to take the probability of second child to be heterozygous, and we are going to take the probability of the heterozygous genotype, which is 0.5. So we can say that the probability for second child to be heterozygous is 0.5, right? So here we have calculated these probabilities, and you can see that these are the simple probabilities in which we don't have added or multiplied any individual probabilities. Rather, we have taken their individual probabilities as such, because these are the examples of the simple probability in which we are talking about a single event and a single type of the outcome. Now we have our third question, which is what is the probability that first two children are homozygous recessive? Now here in this question, is this a simple probability or a compound probability? This is a compound probability because here we are talking about two events, right? And remember that we learned from the example of Dixala and the jelly beans that if we are talking about the two consecutive events, what we are going to do with them, we are going to take the individual probabilities and we are going to multiply those individual probabilities. So here we have the outcome, which is homozygous recessive, but we are talking about two consecutive events. So therefore, we are going to take their individual probabilities and we are going to multiply those individual probabilities. So the probability of first two children to be homozygous recessive is equal to the probability of first child to be homozygous recessive multiplied by probability of second child to be homozygous recessive, right? So which means that this is the probability of the small a genotype multiplied by probability of small a genotype. So this is going to be 0.25 multiplied by 0.25, and this is equal to 0.0625. So the answer to this question is that the probability that first two children are homozygous recessive is 0.0625. So this is our third question in which we have used the principle of compound probability And because we are talking about two consecutive events, so therefore we have multiplied their individual probabilities. And now we talk about the probability, our next question in probability, that what is the probability that second and third children are heterozygous? So here, how many events are we talking about? Again, we are talking about two consecutive events, the second and the third birth, right? And the outcome that we are interested in is the heterozygous genotype. So we are going to calculate the probability of second and third children to be heterozygous. And for that purpose, we need to know the probability of the child to be heterozygous. And we are going to multiply these probabilities. So probability of second child to be heterozygous multiplied by probability of third child to be heterozygous. So this is the multiplication of the probability of heterozygous genotypes. And we know that this probability is 0.5. So 0.5 multiplied by 0.5, and the answer is 0.25. So the probability of second and third children to be heterozygous is 0.25. Now we have our next question, which is what is the probability that first child is female heterozygous? And in this case, we have a single event that we are talking about a single child birth. But what is the type of the outcome? What is the nature of the outcome? We are talking about two different outcomes. One is the female and the other one is the genotype, right? So we are talking about the genotype and gender in this case. So we are going to have a compound probability. So we are going to have we are going to add up the probabilities, or are we going to multiply the probabilities? Because here we are talking about a single event, but the types of the outcomes are different, so therefore we are going to multiply that, right? So the probability of female is going to be multiplied by probability of heterozygous. So the probability of the female is 0.5 and the probability of AA, which is the heterozygous genotype, is 0.5. So we are going to have 0.25. So the probability that first child is female heterozygous is 0.25. And here we have our last question, which is what is the probability that a child is either homozygous dominant or recessive? Now here in this case, we are talking about a single event. We are talking about a single child birth, right? But the types of the outcomes are 2 or 1. The types of the outcomes are 2, but their nature is same, right? We are talking about their genotypes, right? So they belong to the same probability distribution that we are talking about, only their genotype. So the nature of the outcome is 1. So probability of a child to be either homozygous dominant or recessive is going to be the probability of a child to be homozygous dominant plus probability of a child to be homozygous recessive, right? Although these are two different genotypes, but because the nature of the outcome is same, they belong to the same probability distribution, so therefore we are going to add up these probabilities. So the probability of the AA genotype, the homozygous dominant genotype, and probability of the homozygous recessive genotype. So this is going to be 0.25 plus 0.25, which is equal to 0.5. So this is the probability that a child is either homozygous dominant or recessive, and this is equal to 0.5, right? So this is the concept of compound probability. And now we are going to discuss another important concept in probability, which is known as the critical probability. And this concept is very critical in inferential statistics, right? So you need to learn this concept very carefully. And this critical probability is the probability below which the stated outcome of an event is unlikely to occur, right? And this is decided arbitrarily. That is, there is no mathematical basis, or there is no statistical basis on which level we need to decide below which we are going to say that this is a critical probability, or above which we can say that this is not a critical probability. So this has been decided arbitrarily by researchers all over the world. And now we are going to discuss that what is meant by this critical probability. So we are going to take the example of Dixella species that we took in the previous lecture. And suppose that a sample of female Dixella attica is required for a museum, perhaps, right? So how this sample could be collected, because it is hard to catch the flying insects. So therefore, the best strategy is to collect pupa, and when the fly emerges out of that pupa, then that fly could be captured and could be preserved for the museum, right? Or for any kind of the research that you want. So for that purpose, the entomologist is going to visit the pond to collect the pupa. Now, what would be the response of entomologist if, in the first scenario, the first pupa to emerge is a female Dixella attica, right? So what we are talking about is that a sample of the female Dixella attica is required, and for that purpose an entomologist is going to visit the pond, and the entomologist has collected some pupae. Now we are talking about the response of the entomologist, that what is going to be the response of entomologist if the first pupa that emerges out to be a fly, so that pupa emerges out as female Dixella attica. And then the second situation is that what would be the response of entomologist if the first two pupae are going to emerge as female Dixella attica, and what is going to be the response of entomologist if the first three pupae are going to be female Dixella attica, right? Now this is the point of concern. Why? Because for that purpose we need to talk about their probabilities. So the probability for the first case is 0.1. As we discussed in the compound probability, that what is the probability of female Dixella attica? This is 0.5 for female multiplied by 0.2 for Dixella attica. So their compound probability is 0.1. So probability in first scenario is 0.1, right? Which is surprising or no? Which is not that surprising. And we need to calculate the probability of the second possibility, that the first two pupae to emerge are female Dixella attica. So in this case, we are going to multiply their probabilities because we are talking about two consecutive events. So their compound probability is 0.01. And what is the probability of the first three pupae to emerge as female Dixella attica? So this probability is 0.1 multiplied by 0.1 multiplied by 0.1, because we are talking about three consecutive events. So this probability is 0.001, right? So what is the response of entomologist going to be for the first case? It is going to be quite normal, because the chances for this to occur are 10 in 100, right? So 0.1 means 10 in 100. So this is quite likely to occur. But chances for the second case are 1 in 100, right? So 1 in 100 means that this is quite rare thing. So entomologists would be surprised that this is something which was unlikely to occur, but this thing has occurred anyhow. And when the entomologist is going to see that the third pupae is also emerging as female Dixella attica, so this is going to be shocking for the entomologist, because the chances for this thing to happen are only 1 in 1000. The probability is 0.001. So this is going to be something really shocking, right? So here we have the concept of critical probability, that we have to decide a level below which we say that if something which has a probability less than this is going to happen, then this is said to be a critical probability. So we have to decide some level of critical probability below which we can say that this event is unlikely to occur. Because remember that what is the range of the probability? What is the total scale? The scale is from 0 to 1. So the closer we are to 0, the impossibility is increasing, and closer we are to 1, the possibilities are increasing, right? So the probability is decreasing as we move towards 0, and the probability increases as we move towards 1. But there should be a point on this scale where we should decide that if the probability falls below this level, then this probability should be considered as critical, right? Because 0, if we have exactly 0, that is impossible, right? So that is straight away impossible. But when we say that as we move closer to 0, it is going to become rare, right? Its probability is going to decrease. So we should decide a point, a threshold, which we can designate as the critical probability, that if the probability drops below this point towards 0, this is going to be something critical, right? So this is the concept of critical probability. Like in this example, you saw in the first scenario, the chances are 10 in 100, so this is not surprising at all. But when we go to the second chance, this is 1 in 100, which is quite surprising. And the third case is 1 in 1000, which is even more surprising, right? So this is the concept of critical probability that we are talking about here. So here we have the critical probability values, the thresholds that we were talking about, that we should set a threshold. And if the probability of something, a probability of an event falls below that threshold, then we can say that this is a critical probability, right? So here we have these threshold values, and these values have been decided arbitrarily by researchers all over the world, right? So the first level is probability of 0.05. So if the probability of something is less than 0.05, then that event or that outcome is known to be an unlikely event, right? So that outcome is going to be unlikely if the probability is less than 0.05. And if that outcome happens, then we are going to say that this is something significant. And why we're saying that this is something significant? Because the probability was very less. But even if that less probability, this event has occurred, then we are going to say that this is a significant event, right? Then we have our next level of critical probability, and this level is 0.01. So if the probability is less than 0.01, then we are going to say that that outcome is very unlikely to occur. So this is one grade up, right? That we are talking about a probability which is even lower than 0.05. So we are going to say that this event is very unlikely to occur. And if this event occurs, this is going to be highly significant, right? And then we have the next level of critical probability, next threshold level, that if the probability is less than 0.001, then that outcome is said to be highly unlikely, right? And if that outcome occurs, this is said to be very highly significant, right? So why we are saying very highly significant, why we are emphasizing on this significant word so much? Because the probability of that thing to occur was very critical. It was highly unlikely. And even then that event occurs, then we are going to say that this is a very highly significant event, right? So all the probabilities which are above 0.05, they are said to be likely, the outcome is said to be likely, and if that event occurs, this is said to be a non-significant event because its probability was higher, so it was expected to occur. So this is the threshold, this is the critical probability that we use in statistics, that if the probability of something, of some experiment, it falls, or some observation, it falls below 0.05, we are going to say that this is unlikely to occur. And then we have different stages of this unlikeliness, that the initial stage is unlikely, the next stage, if it is less than 0.01, it is very unlikely, and the next stage, if it is less than 0.001, it is highly unlikely. But if that event occurs, we say that this is significant, or it is highly significant, or it is very highly significant. So these are the levels of critical probability used in statistics.